Hello, hello, ladies and gentlemen. We are back. We are rolling. Got some very important stuff to talk about today. It's been a while since I've done a live stream, but I think that this is the right format for what I have to talk about today. So, what I want to talk about today, because of course we have the World Economic Forum meeting coming up January 15th to the 19th in Davos, Switzerland. There's a lot to come from that, a lot to talk about, but a lot of it is not going to be terribly surprising. It's just important to know and to understand what is going on, to see how everything is coming together, and to get a really clear idea of how people are duped by people like those involved with the World Economic Forum, but also governments around the world, because it's not just something that happens for 4 or 5 days a year. It's something that is nonstop, but the World Economic Forum is giving governments around the world the backing, more or less, or the inclination to go out and to work on their populace, to make them more dependent, to make them more fearful. And so we got to talk about some things going on. One of the things that I want to start by talking about is predictive programming, because it's something that we've all heard about. We've all been aware that predictive programming is a thing. But one of the instances that's come up recently is the movie Leave the World Behind, which is an apocalyptic movie about a cyber attack that it shuts down the grid, it knocks out satellites, it causes planes to fall out of the sky, trucks to malfunction, among other things. And then you have drones dropping leaflets in a foreign language, but it says "Death to America." And eventually you find out that it's from a group of America's enemies who found a way to exploit America's weaknesses. And then it comes out that there's this rich black guy in the film who is only a couple degrees removed from the evil cabal that runs the world, which is how he got an inkling that something catastrophic was about to happen. Well, we see medicine become scarce. We see animals start acting weird. And then there's unveiled a 3-stage plan to topple a country's government that's explained in the film. And the first 2 stages involve isolating citizens by disabling communication and transportation, and then terrorizing them and spreading misinformation so that they turn on each other. And we see this because censorship and disinformation is already happening. It's coming right from the mainstream media, though. That's the problem. And right from the major social medias. That's where the censorship and division's happening. So you're already having people who lose communication with other people. You're already having division and emotions running deep because the news just constantly uses emotional language to twist people's feelings, to twist how they view other human beings. And then, of course, the 3rd stage is a coup or a civil war. And the movie really hit the nail on the head with a lot of things. Basically, the idea with predictive programming is that they're telling us things that are either already going on or are going to happen, so that when they happen, it's more normalized. We're more desensitized to it. But one of the things I thought was very interesting that they really hit the nail on the head with was the risk of self-driving cars, or even mostly automated cars, because vehicles today are essentially giant moving computers. They're vulnerable to bugs, hackers, viruses, just like any other computer. So don't think that you need to buy a Tesla for them to stop your car from working. And the reason that all of this is significant, the reason that the whole film is significant, the reason I'm bringing this up at all, because it was adapted from a book that came about in sometime around 2020. The reason that I'm bringing this up at all is that the Obamas are executive producers. Now, they tried to push this under the table like it doesn't mean anything, but the director said Obama was passionate about this movie because he wants to show people what could happen if we don't have strong communal bonds. It almost sounds like the terror aspect to the movie. You know, this is what happens if the people that you hate get power. And that's the agenda being pushed forward here. It's not developing strong communal bonds. It's, see, those people that you don't like, that we told you to hate, those people are keeping you from having strong communal bonds. And that's how this gets flipped. So one kid in the movie is wearing a shirt that says obey, another's wearing a NASA shirt. And just like I said before, the whole purpose of predictive programming is to normalize trauma before it happens, so that when it happens, it doesn't shock people so much. And it allows government-induced trauma to seem normal, or even at worst, unavoidable. It makes it seem like, well, this was going to happen, this was bound to happen, this is just the way things go. And they don't want you to ever realize that you can change things, that you don't have to fall victim to all of these things that the government's trying to push on people. And the producer, Sam Ismail, said that Obama basically came into this after the story was written, and it's not quite the signaling that people make it out to be. But let's get some things straight here, okay? Why would Obama become the executive producer on this film, especially if it's mostly written? What would be the purpose of him becoming an executive producer on this film? Well, it's because the executive producer must secure funding, which means that there's a good chance that this movie was only going to be produced at a very basic level, at a budget level, without the Obama family's involvement. So there's a good chance that this movie is only being produced at a professional level because of the Obamas. The story being written beforehand really doesn't matter. And notice how this film, it didn't have an executive producer prior to Obama, meaning it really wasn't doing too well in its early and mid stages. An executive producer also oversees everything to do with the production on a managerial level. So major decisions that have to be made come back to the executive producer. So there's a reason that he got behind this film, more than simply tweeting it out. And I would venture that it's because of predictive programming. I would venture that it's because he's trying to make sure that this is a mainstream movie produced at a high level that people want to watch. And it's to get more people to normalize these kinds of catastrophic events that are going to come, and to desensitize them to it, to make them think that it's unavoidable from government. But the big reason I want to talk about this predictive programming, of course, is because of the World Economic Forum meeting, January 15th to the 19th in Davos, Switzerland. And it's not just that, it's also the fact that we are in the biggest election year in history. Okay, roughly 49% of the world's population will be represented in these elections. Although how many of them will be fair elections, it's really hard to say. Although it is safe to say that most will not be fair elections, including the U.S., where several states are allowing non-U.S. citizens and illegal migrants to vote in state and local elections. But if you think that they're not getting into national elections, you haven't dug deep enough into this stuff, because they certainly are. Like the busloads of illegals that were going from state to vote, where they had these fake work visas and these fake pay stubs from fake shell companies run by the Democratic National Committee. So it's not exactly that far out to think that the U.S. is not going to have a fair election. In fact, I'm sure that most people watching this are well aware that the U.S. will not have a fair national election. And so I will say, though, one thing is for certain with all of these elections coming up, anyone inclined to commit voter fraud will be pulling out all the stops, and not just in the Western world, but around the globe. And this includes the deep state trying to rig elections in second and third world countries so they can install their puppet dictators. We saw that in Venezuela, and we've seen it in Libya. We've seen it in all over the world. I mean, the entire Middle East is destabilized because we decided who we wanted in power. And that doesn't mean that there weren't other factors, but that was the tipping factor. And we see it in South America. I mean, going all the way back to the 80s, the CIA installing their puppets, their puppet dictators. So it is worth talking about, too, what is being said in the lead up to this massive year. Because what you're going to find here, okay, is just like in early 2016 into the summer of 2016, Black Lives Matter and Antifa had riots. They're like the Google search history is going through the roof. You can see if you go through the history of the Google search term, it spikes up in early and mid 2016. And then it is pretty dormant, and then it spikes up again in early to mid 2020. That's not a coincidence. And another election year, we're going to see the same kind of thing again. And I wouldn't be shocked if it's at a larger scale than it's ever been before. But you have the World Economic Forum's Center for the New Economy and Society, if that isn't Orwellian enough, who published their Global Risk Report for 2024. As I'm sure you can guess, their solutions to all of what they see as the major global risk factors is more money, more government intervention, and more listening to experts. So as we can see here, over the next 2 years, they're predicting misinformation and disinformation will be the largest global risk. I happen to agree, but if I was a betting man, I would bet that we don't have the same culprits. We can also see here that illegal migration is pretty far down the list. They try to be cute and call it involuntary migration, just like a home invasion is an involuntary get-together. They show their hand a bit too, because you can see the top 4 risks over the next 10 years are all environmental. And this fits their narrative pretty well, because they say, as you can see here, the priority for the world, by which they specifically mean the industrialized Western world, is to reduce emissions even faster than previously thought. Even faster than previously thought. I'm going to pull that picture back up here in a minute, but none of this is a surprise because we knew it was never going to be enough. We knew that any regulations that were going to come down, anything, was never going to be enough unless the entire Western world said, okay, no carbon production, none at all. Every gas-powered car is off the roads. Every gas-powered truck is off the roads. No more of it. We knew it was never going to be enough, but the first thing that I'd say is that climate change isn't even a bad thing. If that's hard to hear, you haven't thought about this enough. The second thing is that we knew this would happen because the CO2 temperature models being touted around were showing that hitting their previous target didn't guarantee anything. And to be fair, no target that they ever set will guarantee anything. That's kind of the point of the narrative and the agenda that they're pushing here. That's why they're pointing to CO2, you know, the thing that every plant needs to survive. Because the relationship or lack thereof between CO2 and global temperature means that they get to keep moving the goalposts. The fact that their own models show that we could reduce CO2 production in the Western world by 100% and it would have no guaranteed or even discernible impact on world temperature should be saying something. And notice that if the goal was to truly save the planet, then they would focus on nuclear power, they would focus on innovation through deregulation, and they would end subsidies to fossil fuels. But their goal is not to save the planet. Their goal is to control the planet through more taxes, more government regulation to squash free enterprise, and above all, instilling fear in people. So, notice here that they also mention how there have been 5 mass extinction events in history, which is laughable on its own. But they say people will be responsible for the 6th. So, okay, let's step into their worldview for a second and really wrap our heads around the ridiculousness of what they're saying. They're saying, and this is again the World Economic Forum, they're saying there have been 5 mass extinction events unrelated to human activity at all. but it's a guarantee that people will be responsible for the sixth. What seems a lot more reasonable is that their data surrounding CO2, temperature, and any limit for extinction has no correlation. In fact, there's more life on Earth during warm periods than during cold periods. So they're really lost without a paddle here. But they don't intend to think these things through because that's not what their job is. Their job is to scare people and to justify big government. So now to wrap it back to the predictive programming that I was talking about at the beginning and leave the world behind, you can see that cyber insecurity is 4th over the next 2 years and ranked 8th over the next 10. And you might wonder why it's so far down the list, but it makes sense when you realize it's all political, and their ultimate end goal is to collapse the Western world. That is their ultimate end goal. So pull this list back up. Notice 1, 2, and 3 are polarizing topics. Number 1 is supposed to be defending the people who have been lying to us through the mainstream press. Number 2 is really a phantom fear being exacerbated by government. And number 3 is largely a result of 1. So bread and circuses. That's all that this is bread and circuses. And down below where they break down the fear of cyber insecurity, down below that list, I'll pull it up here in a minute. There is no mention of national vulnerability. In America, our power grid is so old and poorly maintained and interconnected that a simple failure in a key location could wipe out power for tens of millions of people, if not more. This was the whole stink with Texas a few years back when they had the snowstorm that knocked out the power for huge swaths of Texas. And they were like, oh, well, Texas needs to get on the U.S. power grid. They need to stop having their own separate power grid. And it's like, this is exactly why they do that, is because the U.S. power grid is so poorly maintained and it's so old and it's so vulnerable to attack. We have 55,000 substations in America, and it only takes knocking out 9 key substations for a coast-to-coast blackout that could last 18 months. So to make this more clear, okay, what they've done is elevate the issues that divide people and push power and money to governments around the world while simultaneously pushing a serious life-threatening situation to the back burner. Because that serious issue gives them no gain now. There's no point in their minds of elevating cyber insecurity to any serious issue. So people will be aware that it's an issue, so they'll be less surprised when it happens. They'll be desensitized through film and media, and they won't be prepared as a result of all of that. The World Economic Forum, the Schwabs, the Deep State, the Rothschilds, they have managed to, and of course the mainstream press is involved with all of this, and social media, everything, like wrap everything in this evil cabal into a ball, and it's like that's everything that they're doing is what will result in people not being surprised when bad things happen, but not being prepared when those bad things happen. Now, earlier I had said that number 3, I think it was, or number 2, phantom fear being exacerbated by the government. Okay, when I say that environmental concerns are a phantom fear being exacerbated by the government, what I mean is that the fear itself has no basis. So the government creates the thing that they told people to fear. You remember how they convinced people with the Chinese virus that having no symptoms was a symptom? It's kind of the same thing here, except they talk about how extreme weather events show us evidence that global warming is real and it's catastrophic. So they twist facts and they fearmonger, but it's no coincidence that they say extreme weather conditions are caused by global warming, while they can simultaneously create or induce extreme weather events, whether it's forest fires from direct energy weapons, flooding from cloud seeding, or snowstorms from dry ice or some metal dust sprayed in the air. And this goes back into the 1940s. It's nothing new. Actually, the first hurricane modification goes all the way back to 1947 when a hurricane was heading out to sea, but they decided to seed it with dry ice, causing it to reverse direction and come back onto land, hitting Savannah, Georgia. So, don't get me wrong. It makes sense that the atmosphere can hold more moisture as temperature rises, but that doesn't magically explain away everything that's happened. Also, my problem is that the temperature isn't a problem. People are saying 2023 is the hottest year on record, but fail to mention that we've only been keeping records for 150 years, which means that breaking records in either sense, either high or low, is pretty meaningless. I mean, back in the 1300s, there were vineyards in northern Scotland. So we've seen this type of heat before. It's just not an issue. But, okay, back on topic here. A new bill has been introduced in the state of New Hampshire to ban the intentional release of polluting emissions, including cloud seeding, weather modification, excessive electromagnetic radio frequency, and microwave radiation. So now, why is this a concern? What happened that led to this bill being introduced? The bill states that weather modification, aerosol injections, and solar radiation modifications, among other things, are a harm to human health, the environment, agriculture, the economy, and of course, a lot of these things get wrapped in together. Like when agriculture suffers, the economy suffers. When agriculture suffers, human health suffers. Agriculture is suffering because the environment's suffering. Human health suffers when the economy suffers. It's all tied in. But it's basically that everything that leads to a prosperous life is affected by these things, by the polluting emissions, cloud seeding, weather modification, EMFs, microwave radiation. So it is worth bringing up that back in 2011, Rothschild LLC, led by the infamous Rothschild puppet masters, the exact ones you're thinking of, acquired a 70% interest in Weather Central LP, the world's leading provider of interactive weather graphics and data services for television, web, and mobile. It makes sense that when you're involved in programs that destroy the climate, you also need to forecast the models that explain how the climate's being destroyed. So between HARP, Raytheon, Lockheed, and a few other big name government contractors, they have all the weather modification patents and technology needed to control major weather patterns. And then to cap it all off, to really wrap this all together, they have the Rothschild controlled weather graphics and the data to run cover so that forecasts are really just scheduled weather. And I don't mean to go down too deep into the weather modification rabbit hole, but please understand that the World Economic Forum is trying to keep people so surface level with everything that they never see the hands needing the current. They're trying to keep people so surface level that they never see what's really going on below the surface. And this isn't to say that every major weather event is caused by weather modification, but at the very least, it's being allowed. So this whole list here, I'll pull it back up. This whole list is full of things that the government actually has their hands in orchestrating. I could go on through this list with plenty more, but you get the point. We'll see how the World Economic Forum kicks off, but it's not going to be anything surprising. They're going to hit on population control, which could be a whole nother video on its own. In fact, I've done videos on that. They're going to be trying to convince us that eating bugs is hip and cool. They're going to be pushing as much heavy-handed fear-mongering as they can so that particularly Western world governments will feel like they have some backing to move forward with relaying that fear-mongering onto their populace while they push onward with more regulations to stifle industry, more tax dollars to prop up their dysfunctional programs, and ultimately making us all more and more dependent on them. But we know better than to trust the government. So, How do you get prepared for all of this? That sun is killing me. I wasn't prepared for that. So how do you get prepared for all of this? The first thing I would say is find a place to locally source healthy food. Go outside, get sunlight, touch grass, stand barefoot, read your Bible. That's probably the most important thing on this whole list. Take vitamin D, eat beef liver, bone marrow, buy guns, start homeschooling if you're not already. I mean, I've been through things a lot here that are exactly what people need to hear, and I have entire videos actually dedicated to it. Because don't forget that these people hate you. These people hate you, and they control the narrative, they control the politics, they control the money, but you can still control your life. So thank you guys so much for tuning in. I really appreciate it, and I'll see you guys in the next one.